Okay, well, welcome everyone. And thank you, Ron and Jessica, for tag teaming with me today. It's always my delight to work with AARP Colorado. I have a long history with the organization. We started out as collaborative partners, I think, way back in maybe 2005. And it's just a phenomenal organization that does tremendous work in our community. And it affords us a wealth of information related not only to aging, but specifically to caregiving. So, I connected with the organization because there was a common cause, a common passion, a common concern. And so I'm just delighted to be here today. Just do a brief little introduction for those of you that may be new to me so you'll understand where some of my stories come from. Obviously, my name is Jane Barton. My company is Cardinal LLC, and I serve as an educational consultant, which means I get to do what I love every single day. I serve as a speaker, a writer, and or a listener, and I focus on the topics that I'm passionate about: aging, end of life care, and obviously caregiving. I have a background in hospice and palliative care. I served as a chaplain for a brief period of time, and then I moved into the directorship of education for a palliative care institute here in Denver for a number of years prior to launching my own company in 2011. Now, before that, I worked in finance for about 3 or 4 years, and my first career was that of a petroleum geologist. I worked in the oil patch for 16 years, so a rather curious professional path. But of greater relevance today is my personal story. Like many of you, I've been called to care for a number of family members. And my first call came when I was 15. My mom was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer. And that has proved to be the formative event of my life. My family and I cared for mom for 8.5 years until she died. And I learned so much through that experience of being a caregiver. And I think of primary importance was my learning that knowledge is power. And without it, life can be pretty darn scary. So today, many years after the fact, whenever I speak, whenever I write, I think about you, the audience, and what information might prove to be beneficial to you when you're challenged by life. Because I want you to make informed choices instead of merely reacting out of fear, because that never serves us well. So that's my mission today as we talk about the issue of change and uncertainty. That's caregiving. Now, personally, although I know caregiving is one of the hardest things that we will ever do, it takes everything we have to give some days. I also view it as a sacred calling. And so I want to make sure you have maybe a perspective or community resources or approaches that might serve you well when you're dealing with one of the most challenging parts of being a caregiver and or a care recipient, and that is change and the associated subsequent uncertainty after change occurs. So the points of discussion today will include the following. First, we're going to highlight the inherent nature of life. It's not just that change happens when we are in the trenches of caregiving. That's the nature of our lived experience. And with change comes a lot of uncertainty that generates anxiety. Then we will recognize why we're typically resistant to change. And I will share with you some insights from experts in the field related to that. Once done, we'll explore the process of change, because if we understand how change happens and then the consequences of that, we're better equipped to deal with it, not just to resist it or to run away from it or to deny it. And then we'll examine the changes prompted specifically by caregiving. Won't be a comprehensive list, but it will get the creative juices flowing so you can think about your own specific circumstances. That will comprise the first half of the program. Then I want you to leave with some tools in your toolbox on how to deal with change. So I'm going to share with you what I call the 4 R's to deal with change and uncertainty. And we'll expand on those so that you can utilize them in the days and weeks to come. So let's begin by pondering the reality of life. I think you would probably agree that life is a continuous process of change, whether we like change or not. And we as individuals, we actually initiate this process of change. When we pop out of the womb as a tiny little bundle of joy, We take that first breath and we initiate the aging process at the cellular level. And so we are changing physiologically by the nanosecond. But we also change as we evolve as human beings. We evolve emotionally, we change cognitively, mentally, psychosocially, spiritually, personally, and professionally. We change at all levels in all ways. So the only constant in life actually is change. And this incessant change, it results in an uncertain journey. So just think about this. I'm sure there have been moments in time where you feel as if you have everything totally under control. And life is this straight path. You know exactly where you're going. You can see to the end of the road. There is clarity there. And then something happens. You encounter a twist or a turn, and that generates uncertainty because this is not what you had planned, right? But we as human beings, we love the illusion of certainty. We love the illusion of control. And so we keep a tight rein on life. And by so doing, we are avoiding change and uncertainty whenever possible because we're not comfortable with that. And then something happens. We have the reins totally in hand, and then there is this alarming wake up call. And in the context of our discussion today around caregiving, that alarm has to do with a change in health. This is a major turning point in your life, whether it's a diagnosis for yourself or for someone you love, a person you will be called to care for. This really is a 5 alarm fire for the person receiving the diagnosis, as well as for those people who are called to care for that person, because everything is going to change. And that reality is shocking. The reality is that we're not in control. The reality is we're not clairvoyant, and life is unbelievably uncertain. That really is the reality of our existence. This is what Bruce Feiler refers to as a life quake. He wrote a book that was published in 2020, Life is in the Transitions. And he did surveys all across our country for many years, hundreds, if not thousands of people, chatting about their experience of change. And what he determined statistically is that most of us go through about 40 significant changes over the course of a lifetime. And 4 of those 40 changes fall under this definition of a life quake, a massive change or a pileup of changes resulting in aftershocks for years. So, what he determined is that a change in health, as we all know, for ourselves or someone else in our family, that is a major turning point in life. All bets are off after that. And immediately after the diagnosis, the life quake, then depending on that particular diagnosis or associated disability, there are going to be aftershocks for years. So the dust is not going to settle quickly. This is a life-changing moment for all concerned. And so we are all going to be challenged physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and also psychosocially. So after a life quake, after a change in health, it's very hard to, number one, achieve a new balance and also to maintain it. Because just when you think you found your sea legs and things are going well, something else happens to disrupt it, to destabilize you. Perhaps another diagnosis, maybe a new symptom that needs to be managed. Maybe it's just the progressive decline associated with the disease process. But there is not a guaranteed level of stability in the aftermath of a significant change in health. And associated with that is a future that is very uncertain. You can't see to the end of the road. There is no clarity, and life becomes increasingly mysterious. Now, I would imagine many of you listening today love to read mysteries. I know that I certainly do. But you probably don't like living in mystery because that raises your level of anxiety. It prompts a lot of fear, and that can be very restrictive. Because when we are afraid, we can start to pull back and withdraw. We're afraid to lift our eyes to the future, to contemplate what might happen in the future. And so we can become paralyzed by that anxiety and that fear. And in addition to being fearful, it's also exhausting because you're trying to accommodate one change after another change as a care recipient or a caregiver. And there's actually a term for this. It is referred to as change fatigue. Now, I would imagine everyone viewing this video, listening to me today, you've been called to care at some point in time. And if we were in a room together and you were listening to my definition of change fatigue, you would probably be nodding your head in realization of, yes, I know that feeling. Well, now you actually know the term associated with that. Now that we recognize the relationship between change and the subsequent uncertainty and some of the consequences of that, we need to also realize and own how we typically deal with change, individually and also collectively as human beings. And the typical response to change is one of defiance. We resist it, we deny it, we run away from it, but we don't like it. Now, in a classroom that I would conduct, and I did this years ago talking about change and transition, I would ask people, how many of you love change? And typically 5 to 10% of the room, hands would fly up and they would disclose that they kind of got revved up with change. Now, the rest of the room, the majority of the people, when I posed that question, they would look at the floor, they would dive into their purse, they would stare at their smartphone, but they wouldn't even make eye contact with me. Change was so uncomfortable for them. So that really is our typical response as human beings. And why is that? Well, that's a question that Robert Kagan has spent a lot of his academic career exploring. And he published a book many years ago entitled Immunity to Change. And he said humans basically have an inherent resistance to change. Just like when we're born, we have an immune system that fights off disease and infection, we evidently have another immune system that fights off change. And he's discovered through countless years of interviews with people from all walks of life, we resist change because we want to hang on to the status quo, the known, because that's our comfort zone. And we have that illusion of certainty. We have that illusion of control. It is our normal, and it provides a sense of order. Now, we are creatures of habit. We love a routine because it gives us a sense of certainty. That's another reason that we will resist change almost at all cost. So when life veers off track, wow, that's when anxiety starts to flow. That's when we get a little bit twitchy because it's disorienting, it's disconcerting, and as we've already recognized, it's frightening. And the chaos and the disorder that ensues, incredibly stressful, again, leading to that experience of total exhaustion, that experience of change fatigue. But change is our reality. We've already recognized that the only constant in life is change. And so, lurking around every corner, every twist and turn over the course of your lifetime, there's the potential for another moment of change as well. So, what's to be done? What could possibly mitigate our fear of change? And what might inspire us to confront uncertainty? Well, as in all things over the course of my lifetime, knowledge is power. Understanding this process of change, understanding the relationship between change and uncertainty, and the consequences of change. That's what will help us the most because then we will have realistic expectations. We can anticipate what lies ahead. So, I want to share with you some information and some insights from an expert in the field of change, organizationally and personally. William Bridges was an expert in the field for decades, and I believe he died maybe 15 or 20 years ago. but his work is still quite relevant. And I've read many of his books, and I want to share some of the insights I've gleaned from his work that I can apply to this whole journey of life, and in particular to the journey of caregiving. So imagine this. Let's say today you are cruising around on your sea of tranquility, and it's a gorgeous day, just like it is here in Denver today. Blue skies, sunshine, gentle breezes. There's rarely a ripple in your sea. So life is pretty good. And then something happens, change. Now, William Bridges describes change as a situational shift. And change is as if someone drops a huge boulder in your sea of tranquility, sometimes unexpectedly. In fact, more often than not, that's how it happens. And once that boulder drops, your seas are now rocking and rolling. The waves are crashing on shore. The winds are howling, and you're wondering, what in the world just happened? Well, there's been a distinct shift in your existence. Now, the magnitude of your waves certainly correlates to the magnitude of change. Small changes, you're going to have a few ripples in your sea, and you will accommodate that fairly quickly. You will discover your sea legs rapidly and continue to sail on. But big changes, they result in waves on the magnitude of a tsunami, threatening to knock you off your foundation, and it will have ripple effects for years to come, related back to the definition of a life quake, as we've already noted according to Bruce Feiler. So when these moments occur, these are life-changing events. And oftentimes, this is what happens in the aftermath of a change in health, again, dependent on the severity of the diagnosis and or the disability. Now, the other thing we need to be aware of, as we learned from the work of William Bridges, is that we typically don't fear change, although that's how we describe it, that's how we articulate it. But recognize sometimes we don't even know change is about to occur. So, for example, in 1992, I was sitting at my desk in Houston, Texas. I was still working in the oil business. And my phone rang. I picked it up and I heard my brother's voice, which I knew meant something happened because he never called me at work. And he shared with me that he'd just received a call from a hospital in our hometown and our father had had a stroke. Bam! That was the situational shift for me. That was the big change. But I hadn't been sitting at my desk fearing that phone call. I had no idea my dad was going to have a stroke. He was doing really well. He was playing golf every day. He was living the life. And so I didn't fear that change. But I can tell you, as I was driving back home, it was a 9-hour drive, I had a lot of fear of the consequences of that change. I was fearful of the turbulence of the transition after that change. What was yet to come? In that drive, I was driving through a very stormy time internally, emotionally. The seas were rocking and rolling, and life was incredibly uncertain for me. I had no idea the damage that had been done neurologically or physically to my father in that moment. And so it's in the aftermath of change that anxiety and fear can be incredibly debilitating. That is when stability is threatened. That is when nothing seems normal and everything is beyond our control. And that is when we are longing to go back to a pre-change moment. Now, we all know this longing. We've done it individually, and we did it collectively as a global population during COVID. I can't tell you how many times when I was watching the news in 2020, I heard commentators talking about, well, when life gets back to normal, or when we go back to normal. And I was sitting there listening to them thinking, don't you realize we will never go back? That is the nature of change. Change, by definition, means something ends And when something ends, we experience a huge loss, which means that cannot be recovered. So we can't go back to normal. We have to imagine a new normal. And that reality that there's no going back, that is tremendously frustrating. It's aggravating and it's distressing to us. That's one reason we don't like change. But having realistic expectations, knowing that we can't do a U turn, that's beneficial. We know what to focus on, we know what direction to look to. And that means we need to look in the forward direction, not backward, because life is forever changed by the definition of change. So, with that said, in the aftermath of change, the big question is well, now what? What do we do? Well, you do have a choice. You can say, well, I'm going to resist change. I'm going to deny it. I'm going to be angry with it. And I'm just going to stay where I am. I'm going to be stuck in this moment. You can do that, and life will flow around you and move on without you. So, what purpose does that serve you? Or you can find the courage to say, I'm going to choose to embrace change. Doesn't mean I have to like it. Doesn't mean I even have to accept it, but I can reconcile myself to the fact that this is now my reality, and I can figure out how to move forward. We can choose to seek and accept reorder since we can't go back. Now, how do we do that? Well, we have to understand the journey of change. And so I want to share with you an image. It's a model that I created over a decade ago. And it helps you to understand what happens in the unfolding of your transition after change. And it also helps you to measure how well you're doing as far as making progress, because sometimes we need to have milestones along the way. So I want to walk you through a model that I've entitled Bridge Time. And it helps you to imagine this process of change and the subsequent transition. And the story goes something like this. Let's imagine that you awakened today and everything went exactly as you had planned. Exactly. So you're on a smooth path, it's flat, it's easy. You can see to the end of the road, you feel in control, you're confident. And then, quite unexpectedly, you come upon a detour sign and you have to take a sharp right. And you're a little bit ticked off. It's kind of an inconvenience, but you think, okay, I can manage this. And you take a few strides until you hit a point of inflection. And all of a sudden, your path, the gradient is dramatically steeper. And life just got a lot harder. That represents the left side of the bridge. And it metaphorically represents change. Boom, something just happened. Now you're standing there somewhat perplexed, maybe even shocked, and you hear roaring water. And you're like, what is that about? And you look forward, and there is a huge chasm before you. And you peer over the edge, and you see the turbulent waters of transition. And you're thinking, well, how am I going to navigate this? How am I going to get from this side of the chasm to the other? Well, then you notice there's a lovely bridge before you, and you're standing at the entry point. But it's a peculiar bridge in that it's incredibly narrow. It's one way. And once you enter that bridge, you can't turn around. You can't go back. So now you're assessing, well, do I want to take that risk and get on this bridge? And then you try to peer to the edge of the bridge and you can't see that far. So you don't know exactly, does it go all the way? And if it does span this chasm, what is it leading to? And so there is some uncertainty. There is some anxiety. There's a lot of fear. And the other emotion that you're feeling is a tremendous amount of grief. Because when change happened, you lost something or someone. And our natural response to loss is grief. So these transitional bridges, although they are mandatory to get us from what was to what will be, they require a tremendous amount of courage and a lot of work to navigate those. and it takes a leap of faith to start that journey. So, transitions in and of themselves are particularly scary times because we don't know what's on the other side. It's uncertain. And so courage is going to be required during the transitions of life, whether we're talking about specifically caregiving or life in general. So it's no wonder we resist change, right? Once we understand the nature of change and the subsequent transitions, the challenges of that, and the uncertainty associated with it. So now that we understand the relationship between change and uncertainty, we have a general concept of how change happens, how it unfolds, and how transitions are particularly challenging. Let's think about the changes that we can anticipate, that we should expect, prompted by medical concerns. So we're not caught off guard, we're not caught unaware, and maybe we could actually prepare for these. Not only the initial diagnosis, the life quake, but the aftershock as well. All the subsequent changes associated with that. So, initially, when we have a major change in health identified or diagnosed, that's when life as we knew it ends abruptly. And those moments are particularly poignant. And I would imagine all of you listening today are reflecting back on a moment in time when this happened. My first time was related to my experience with my mom. I was 15, as I noted previously, and I remember the day that my dad came home after my mom had had surgery. And he walked into our home. We were in the living room. The sun was streaming in through the back windows. And I remember that exact moment when dad uttered the word cancer. And my life ended as a kid. And from that point forward, I was dealing with some really big issues, typically assigned to adults. My adolescence had been abbreviated, and I was navigating the healthcare system. I had become a primary caregiver. That was a moment in time that will stick with me until my last breath. I'm sure you've experienced similar ones in your life as well. Now, after that life quake, there are subsequent changes as well because every facet of life is going to be impacted for the caregiver and the care recipient, personally and professionally. For example, we all have plans. We have financial plans, we have vacation plans, we have career plans. Well, after a life quake, after a change in health, many of those plans are going to be derailed, and expectations of the future are going to change subsequent to that. We also will see hopes and dreams that by necessity are going to have to change. If you get diagnosed with a change in health in your 60s or 70s, maybe you had all kinds of hopes and dreams of traveling the world, starting a nonprofit, volunteering somewhere. That may no longer be possible with a change in health. The daily rhythm of life changes, just the ordinary day to day activities. So, what you used to do, you may have to add additional duties, or maybe there are things you have to eliminate because now you have a to do list as a primary caregiver. And roles and responsibilities definitely are going to change. This is why a diagnosis, although it's a personal challenge, it's a family challenge for the people that are responsible for your care. For example, if, let's say, the matriarch or the patriarch in your family has a significant disease process diagnosed, are they still able to fulfill their role and responsibility within your family? Maybe now, but not in the future. And is there someone that's willing to fill that gap? Maybe there will actually be a power struggle in your family. And if not, maybe no one wants the job and there's a void in that system. So, a lot of different variations dependent on the nature of your family structure. We certainly know that one of the big changes after a change in health can be in our relationships with our family and our friends. Within the family, in intimate relationships between a husband and a wife, a mother and a daughter, Now you have the overprint of practical roles and relationships, caregiver and care recipient, which implies a power differential, which can erode away and actually weaken some of those intimate relationships. That can be incredibly problematic. As far as people outside the family, I've listened to so many stories over the last 20 or 30 years of people who have been disappointed by friends they thought would always be there for them. And yet, after a diagnosis, friends kind of faded away and they weren't there for them. They couldn't count on them. And they always wondered, why was that? I thought we were better friends than that. We also will see changes in our financial health. I think we are all painfully aware of the expense associated with healthcare today. And if you're dealing with a disease that may have a duration of 10 or 20 years, that can start to dial into your 401ks, your IRAs, the savings that maybe you had pigeonholed for more enjoyable activities. And now you have to have a totally different budget, a totally different mindset for those expenditures. Now, all of these changes that we've noted previously, they can certainly challenge our foundational and fundamental beliefs. So we may see that our spiritual beliefs are changed by a change in health. We start to doubt everything we've believed to be true up until this point in time. We start to doubt the divine essence, the sacred presence that we have chosen to worship over the course of a lifetime. We may feel duped. We may feel abandoned. We may feel betrayed. And a change in our spiritual beliefs, if we go into an existential crisis doubting everything we have chosen to believe, that can be incredibly destabilizing because oftentimes this is the one foundation from which we deal with the dark nights of our soul. Associated with a significant change in health, certainly the physical and or cognitive changes can be incredibly problematic for the patient as well as the family caregiver. That can dial into mental health changes. We know predicated on years of research and surveys that have been published, depression is not uncommon in family caregivers, and certainly in family caregivers who are dealing with the long experience of caring for someone with dementia, such as Alzheimer's disease. So I'm sure we could add to that list, and you may want to do so when we have time to chat at the end of my prepared remarks. But this is just a few items that are recognized that change. There are others, but basically, a change in health turns everything on its head. Our world changes. And so it is this domino effect. It is a life quake. So, with that said, recognizing the call to care, a change in health, it's going to change your life. How do we navigate these turbulent times when the seas are rocking and rolling? How do we cross all the transitional bridges? Because there will be numerous ones over the course of this caregiving journey. How do we deal with the proverbial domino effect of change? Well, I just happen to have a few suggestions. Because as I mentioned in the preamble, I want to make sure you leave here with an idea of something perhaps you can do to augment what you're currently doing to improve your lived experience as a caregiver or a care receiver. So, I want to share with you the 4 R's to guide your journey. These are the guiding lights that perhaps you're already dabbling with, but maybe you want to leverage one a little bit more now. Or maybe I give you a new idea and you can test drive it in the days and weeks to come. But the 4 R's are realism, resilience, response, and ritual. So let's touch on each one of these. How can realism help you? Well, realism is defined as the attitude or practice of accepting a situation as it is and being prepared to deal with it accordingly. So this goes to the point that we don't deny change, we don't run away from it, we don't just scream and shout at it. We find the courage and the ability to look it straight in the eye and say, okay, this is my situation. These are my circumstances. And now what? What do I intend to do? Well, in order to make a plan to move forward, you need information. So, immediately after the recognition of a change in health, understand the diagnosis. What does that mean? Well, what is the prognosis? Is this a short term proposition? Is there a chance for cure? Is this a progressive chronic condition? This will let you know whether you need a plan for 6 weeks, 6 years, maybe a couple of decades. Now, having that information, that means you have realistic expectations about the trek that you are on, and you can equip yourself for that trek and you can plan accordingly. It will be a juggling act along the way because if it's a significant diagnosis and a change in health, remember you have the initial life quake and then all of the aftershocks. That's to be expected. So don't be surprised by that and become very adept at handling all those subsequent changes. So you must anticipate a bumpy ride, and that doesn't mean you have to be negative or despairing about it. It is just the nature of the journey. And so when you do encounter a bump along the way, you can choose to adapt, to adjust, and to accommodate that bump. And you don't have to be shocked and surprised and fearful and anxious. It's just part of the journey. You don't have to particularly like it, but you're better prepared for it, which means you learn to bounce back from adversity. You become more resilient. Now, resilience is the second guiding light in your experience in the caregiving journey. And resilience is defined by the American Psychological Association in this way: it's not a genetic trait that some of us have and others do not. It's a process that we can learn over the course of our existence. It's a process of learning to adapt well in the face of adversity. It means bouncing back from difficult experiences. And evidently, there are some essential ingredients to bounce back. This, according to Stephen Southwick, who is an expert in the field of resilience. He published a book, I believe it was back in 2009, entitled Resilience, in which he reports his conclusions and data gathered over years, interviewing people who had been challenged by life. And instead of being destroyed by their adversity, they actually became stronger and they flourished. So he was curious. How did POWs from Vietnam, people intimately impacted by 9/11, and those serving in the special forces, how did they deal with adversity such that they continued on with life in amazing ways? Well, he came up with a handful of characteristics and traits that seem to be very common in this group of particularly resilient people. And the first ingredient that he said was almost mandatory was optimism. Optimism is the spark that ignites resilience. And it makes so much sense, doesn't it? It's not about being overly optimistic, it's being realistically optimistic. We don't want to have pie in the sky ideas or rose colored glasses. But when the world is falling down around our head and shoulders, we have to be able to look forward and find a glimmer of hope on the horizon. Otherwise, why bother? We have to believe there are better days ahead, realistically, and then figure out how to get there, how to make it happen. And we can only do that if we have courage, because we've already talked about the scary transitional times after change. So we need to be braver and bolder, sometimes more than we ever imagined possible. But we are courageous people. I see and hear that every single day. I hear stories from all the folks that come to my programs that are in the trenches of caregiving. And what they handle between 6 a.m. and noon is beyond belief to me. And they do it without complaint. When push comes to shove, they rise to the occasion. They hang on to a little bit of hope and they believe they can do this. Another essential ingredient to being resilient is making sure you don't think you have to do it all by yourself. A supportive community is critically important. Now, that doesn't mean other people do your heavy lifting, but they can cheer you on. As you're crossing those transitional bridges, they can believe in you so you can believe in yourself. And so we are relational creatures. There's so much information out there today that attests to that fact. We need each other, we want each other, and we are definitely better together, particularly in times that are adverse and that are challenging every fiber of our being. Another characteristic or trait of particularly resilient people is that they oftentimes have role models in their life that inspire them. People that have been through the grind, that have come out the other side and have actually grown and thrived because of their adversity. So maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a sibling, perhaps a grandparent, but there's someone that they choose to emulate. If they could do it, I can do it. So seek those inspirations in your own life. And I'm sure you will recognize a few individuals that have inspired you along the way. We also need to appreciate the importance of our willingness to adapt to changed circumstances. Adaptability is critically important if we're to bounce back. Now, I know it's, I think, kind of alluring sometimes when life throws us a curveball to become a wee bit self righteous. We want to stand rigid in the winds of change and we want to raise our fist to the heavens and we want to scream at the fates and say, this is not fair. This is unjust. This is not right. And that rage may feel good for a short period of time, but it serves no good purpose because life has changed. And we are much better served to adapt and to conform rather than be resistant. So we have to be willing to bend a little bit in order not to be broken by life. And certainly a sense of humor always serves us well. Humor is one of our best methods of coping, isn't it? Again, a wealth of research that attests to this fact. So keep your sense of humor, have a belly laugh occasionally. We know the physiological benefits of laughter. And also, just having a different perspective, a different take on a situation can be beneficial. So, it's not to say we laugh at our circumstances, but we can find humor despite our situation. And that can be incredibly beneficial. Of equal importance to being optimistic is having a sense of significance, of meaning and purpose in your life, knowing why you are here and what you are about. That can get you through some pretty tough times. Now, Viktor Frankl taught an entire generation the importance of meaning in his memoir entitled Man's Search for Meaning. This is his story of being interned in Auschwitz for 3.5 years during World War II. He was the only member of his family who had been arrested that survived that experience. And he credits it to the fact that he truly believed there was a reason for him to live. And he believed that meaning is the driving force for humanity. He echoed the sentiment of a 19th century existential philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, "He who has a why to live can bear with almost any how." So if we truly believe there's a reason to be, despite our circumstances, we can handle anything that life throws at us. And the why extends beyond a particular moment of change and loss to incorporate the entirety of our existence. So knowing your why in life, that will help you to persist. It will sustain you. And last but certainly not least is having a sense of the other, a foundational faith, having something that guides you through life, that helps you discern right from wrong, good from bad. It's a pillar that you lean against that will support you when you are going through trying times. Now, some people will say it's their religious tradition, others will describe it as their spirituality, others maybe ethics or morals. But faith is a place of mystery where you find the courage to believe what you cannot see and the strength to let go of our fear of uncertainty. This, according to Brene Brown out of the University of Houston. So, those are just a few of the ingredients, I think, the most relevant for our conversation today that Stephen Southwick highlights. But the bottom line regarding resilience, as far as being a guiding light for you during troubling times, is this. According to Amma Marston in her book Type R, transformational resilience provides the framework and skills that enable us to use adversity, to use change, and to use life's challenges as opportunities for innovation, creativity, growth, and transformation. So that is a very different framing of difficult situations. It's a very difficult or different framing of change. It's a different approach and an attitude to it. Instead of resisting it, denying it, ignoring it, Marston is saying, hey, use it. Use it to your betterment. And the way we do that is to be very mindful about our response to change. So a response, it's another guiding light on how to navigate change and the subsequent transitions. So in the aftermath of change, we do have a choice, whether we feel like it or not in the moment. We have a choice on how to respond, not just to react, but how to respond to change and uncertainty. Attitude is going to be everything in this choice. Remember, optimism is the spark that ignites resilience. Well, attitude, optimism certainly informs our response to change as well. Marston goes on to say that although we may not be able to control our external circumstances, one of the magnificent things about human beings is that we can always choose our attitude in any circumstance, and our attitude informs our response. So, through the twists and the turns of life, through the twists and the turns of caregiving, how do you choose to respond? That's something that we all have to decide. The choice is yours. The choice is mine. And it's a profoundly important choice because that choice will determine the trajectory of your experience from that point forward, for better or for worse. Now, the last R that I want to talk about, and this will be the conclusion of the presentation, so get ready to chat. I want to share with you how ritual can help us through the dark nights of the soul, through the problematic times of transition. Now, I would imagine many of you engage in ritual. You probably know the benefits of it. But I think it's important to articulate this because I hear so many people disparaging ritual of late, that it's rote, that it's routine, that it's mindless. Well, true ritual is anything but that. Rituals are intentional and meaningful acts that can serve us well, particularly during times that are chaotic, that are uncertain, that seem beyond our control. Thomas More describes a ritual as any action, secular, sacred, individual, communal, long, short, complex, or simple. It's any action that speaks to the soul and to the deep imagination. Even the smallest rites of everyday existence are important to the soul. So I want to share a story with you that will distinguish ritual from routine and also the importance of ritual. Every day, I start by going into my kitchen and I make a cup of hot tea. That is my morning routine. Grab a cup, fill it with water, nuke it, throw a tea bag in, let it steep, drink it. Mission accomplished. I have caffeine in this body. Gets the day rolling. So that's fine. I love my routine. But about once a quarter, I needed to brew a very special pot of hot tea. So I go into the kitchen and I pull down a china teacup and a china teapot that's been in my family for generations. And I will only brew constant comment tea. That was my mom's favorite tea. And as that tea is steeping and I smell that characteristic fragrance of oranges and spices, I am transported back to my childhood home. I'm sitting in the kitchen across the table from my mom, and we're chatting about life. I did that with my mom every day after school. It was our ritual. And when I conduct that ritual today, I am reconnected with the memory of my mother. And I do this when I need that sense of home, when I need that sense of belonging, when I'm missing her the most. I do it intentionally because I have a need to fill. That is the power of ritual. Ritual frames ordinary time as extraordinary time. We've done it for a particular purpose. And it also has the power to connect us to that which is beyond ourselves. So I can do a ritual and connect to memories, a sense of the sacred and the divine, perhaps to a sense of meaning and purpose, to other people, to other organizations, to other ideas and concepts. So it gets me beyond myself. And ritual also satisfies our hunger for the familiar, for the known, getting us back into our comfort zone during times that are chaotic and disordered. Now, I've probably conducted my ritual of making hot tea thousands of times. I could do it with my eyes closed. So I have that comfort that I know how to do this. I am in control, even when everything else is beyond my control. So conducting ritual, it gives you that desired sense of predictability, continuity, and order. Again, when everything else is out of your control, it's that anchor, it's that port in the storm where you can take a deep breath and feel confident you can keep going. So during turbulent, uncertain times, I encourage you to embrace life-giving daily rituals. Doesn't have to take up a lot of time, but be intentional. Understand why you're doing it and appreciate the benefits you derive from it. Because rituals will provide much needed stability during times of change and uncertainty. So, with that said, hopefully one of those four will be of benefit to you in some small way. Just a few parting notes. If you are feeling a bit overwhelmed today because you are in this journey of caregiving, you've had significant changes or subsequent aftershocks, I have a heartfelt invitation for you today. Change your mindset. Do not be victimized by your circumstances. Realize you have the freedom to choose a response to your circumstances. And you can use that attitude to seek your guiding lights during this challenging time, lights that will serve you well. I also encourage you to choose to hang on to hope. Hope is mandatory if you are to keep going, if you are to persist and to continue on with your experience. And I hope that you will choose to respond in life-giving ways. So, if you've come to my programs before, you know I always have a heartfelt closing ritual. I always have one more thing to say. So, I want to share with you a reflection from Eckhart Tolle. And I think this is certainly appropriate related to our discussion today. He talks about uncertainty. He said, if uncertainty is unacceptable to you, it turns into a fear. If it is perfectly acceptable, it turns into increased aliveness, increased alertness, and increased creativity. So, my fervent hope and prayer for all of us, and I'm speaking to myself as well, is that we will strive to become ever increasingly alive, alert, and creative as we move through our lived experience, because change is going to be part of it. Transitions will be challenging. But if we are alive, alert, and creative, we can believe we can deal with them, we can move through them, and we will live beyond them. May it be so. So, a few other resources you might want to tap into related to our topic today. You can always check out my website, cardinallife.com. You can click on the events tab. I have some other programs coming up that are relevant to caregiving. I have videos, podcasts, blogs also posted as well. If you're looking for a resource on caregiving, I wrote a book a few years ago, Caregiving for the Genius, available in a lot of the libraries scattered around Denver. If you want to tap into one through Amazon, feel free to do so. But I think you can access through the library system most readily. If you're a fan of podcasts, I have Cardinal Musings with Jane Barton. Again, some topics related to resilience, adaptability, as well as aging and caregiving. And I certainly want to point you in the direction of the Family Resource Center for Caregivers offered by AARP. This is a national website, but it also has some specific resources to Colorado and even to the Denver area. So it's intensive. It's going to take you a little bit of time to walk through it, as you can see by all of the different categories they cover, but a wealth of information related to caregiving. So I highly recommend it. And more than anything, I want to thank you for your time and attention. I know you have some options, and it is a gorgeous day outside. So I'm very honored you're here today. Know I'm sending you many blessings on your journey. And if you have any subsequent questions or concerns, you can contact me via email, cardinallife@msn.com. I would love to continue the conversation with you.